March 1943, North Africa. The sky above Tunisia burned under a sun that turned aluminum into mirrors and cockpit glass into furnaces. Lieutenant Franz Kohler sat strapped into the cramped cockpit of his Messerschmitt Bf 109 G6, 22,000 feet above the coastal town of Bizerte. The Mediterranean spread beneath him like hammered bronze. His gloved hand rested on the control column. His breathing came steady through the rubber mask, each exhalation fogging the oxygen feed momentarily before clearing again. He had been flying combat sorties for 18 months. Before that, Poland. Before that, training fields in Bavaria, where the instructors had spoken of air superiority as if it were a birthright. Now, in the spring of 1943, that certainty had begun to fracture. The radio crackled. His wingman, Oberfeldwebel Ritter, flew 300 meters off his starboard side, a grey silhouette against the white haze of high altitude. They were escorting a formation of Junkers Ju-87 Stukas returning from a supply interdiction run along the coast. The dive bombers lumbered below them, vulnerable and slow, their fixed landing gear giving them the appearance of predatory birds caught mid-strike. Kohler scanned the horizon. The Allied air presence had intensified in recent weeks. American fighters had begun appearing in numbers that defied the intelligence briefings. Curtiss P-40 Warhawks, some Spitfires transferred from British squadrons, dangerous but familiar. Aircraft he had learned to fight, learned to respect, learned to kill. Then he saw them. 2 contacts, high and fast. 11 o'clock, perhaps 5 kilometers distant, descending in a shallow dive that suggested neither caution nor hesitation. Kohler's pulse quickened. He keyed his radio. Achtung, feindlicher Jäger, 11 o'clock high. Ritter's acknowledgement came immediately. Both German pilots banked left, climbing to meet the threat, their Daimler-Benz engines roaring as throttles pushed forward. The Stukas continued their retreat, unaware or unwilling to deviate. Kohler squinted through his gun sight. The approaching aircraft did not match any silhouette he had memorized. Twin fuselages, a central nacelle, long, straight wings that seemed to stretch impossibly across the sky. The configuration was alien, asymmetrical in a way that violated every principle of aerodynamic elegance he had been taught, but they were closing fast. The first burst of gunfire came without warning. Tracers arced across the sky, not the scattered spray of wing-mounted guns, but a concentrated stream that converged with mechanical precision. Kohler broke hard right, the G-forces crushing him into his seat as the horizon spun. He heard the hammering thud of rounds striking metal, not his aircraft, Ritter's. He craned his neck, searching for his wingman. Ritter's Messerschmitt tumbled, trailing smoke from the engine cowling, the propeller windmilling uselessly as the pilot struggled for control. The enemy fighter flashed past, its twin booms unmistakable now, its nose bristling with weapons. Kohler caught a glimpse of White Star insignia, American. He had never seen anything like it. The second fighter banked smoothly, vectoring toward the fleeing Stukas. Kohler pushed his throttle past the red line, engine temperature rising into dangerous thresholds, and dove after it. His thumb hovered over the firing button. The American aircraft rolled, evading without apparent effort, and Kohler realized with cold clarity that he was not chasing it. It was allowing him to follow. The twin-boomed fighter pulled up sharply, climbing at an angle that should have bled its speed, should have left it vulnerable. Instead, it accelerated. Kohler's Messerschmitt shuddered as he fought to match the climb, his airspeed dropping, stall warnings beginning to vibrate through the control column. The American leveled off, inverted, and rolled back toward him. Kohler saw the nose light up. 4 heavy machine guns, 1 cannon, all mounted in the central nacelle, all firing along a single axis with no convergence issues, no spread. The rounds passed so close he felt the turbulence shake his canopy. He broke left, then right, then into a split S-dive that sent his altimeter unwinding like a broken watch. The enemy fighter followed, matching every maneuver, staying just beyond firing range but never losing position. Kohler's throat tightened. His hands were slick inside his gloves. This was not a pursuit. This was a demonstration. At 8,000 feet, the American fighter peeled away, climbing back toward the sun with a speed that left Kohler's Messerschmitt wallowing in disturbed air. He leveled off, gasping, and scanned the sky. Ritter's aircraft was gone. The Stukas were scattered. The twin-boomed fighters had vanished as quickly as they had appeared. Kohler turned for home, his fuel gauge reading low, his hands trembling on the controls. He did not understand what he had just encountered. But he understood this. The rules had changed, and no one had told him. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning had been designed in secret, born from a 1937 Army Air Corps specification that demanded the impossible, a high-altitude interceptor capable of reaching 360 miles per hour at 20,000 feet, with enough firepower to destroy bombers in a single pass. Lockheed's chief engineer, Clarence Kelly Johnson, had answered with an aircraft that defied convention. Twin Allison V-1710 engines, liquid-cooled, each producing 1,475 horsepower, contra-rotating propellers to eliminate torque, a tricycle landing gear for visibility during ground operations, and all armament concentrated in the nose, 4 Browning M2 50-caliber machine guns and 1 Hispano 20mm cannon, firing through the propeller arc without synchronization issues. By March 1943, the P-38 had been deployed to North Africa as part of the nascent 12th Air Force. Pilots called it the Fork-Tailed Devil. German and Italian pilots had other names, none of them complimentary. Lieutenant Richard Ira Ritt Schroeder sat in the intelligence tent at Telergma Airfield, Algeria, listening to a briefing he had heard 3 times already. He was 24 years old. He had logged 200 hours in the P-38, including 40 combat sorties. He was not yet an ace, but he had learned to trust the aircraft in ways he had never trusted the P-40 he'd flown before. The intelligence officer, a captain with a permanent squint from reading reconnaissance photos under poor lighting, tapped a map with a wooden pointer. Luftwaffe activity has increased along the coastal corridor. We're seeing regular patrols of 109s and 190s, usually in pairs or fours. Their job is to protect transport routes and interdict our bomber formations. Schroeder listened without taking notes. He had learned that most intelligence briefings were educated guesses wrapped in authoritative language. The truth emerged in the cockpit, at 25,000 feet, when the enemy appeared and the radios erupted into overlapping shouts. Your mission today is sweep and engage. We want them to know we're here. We want them to react. And we want to see how they handle the Lightning. The pilots exchanged glances. There was no arrogance in the room, but there was confidence. The P-38 had proven itself in the Pacific Theater, where its range and speed had allowed it to escort bombers deep into Japanese-held territory. But the European war was different. The Luftwaffe pilots were experienced, disciplined, and unforgiving of mistakes. Schroeder's squadron commander, Major Thomas White, stood and addressed the room. He was a veteran of the early Pacific campaigns, a man who spoke in clipped sentences and expected immediate compliance. You have speed, you have altitude, you have firepower. Use all 3. Do not dogfight. The 109 can outturn you at low speed. The 190 can outdive you if you let it. Your advantage is energy retention. Stay fast, stay high, hit and climb. The pilots nodded. Schroeder felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the pre-mission tension that never entirely disappeared no matter how many times he flew. He had learned to channel it, to let it sharpen his focus rather than cloud it. 30 minutes later, he was airborne. The P-38 climbed effortlessly, its twin engines synchronized, its cockpit spacious compared to the single-engine fighters he had flown before. Schroeder adjusted his oxygen regulator and checked his instruments. Fuel full, guns armed, turbochargers engaged. His wingman, Lieutenant Carl Moore, flew off his right side, maintaining loose formation. They crossed the coast at 24,000 feet, the desert below them a patchwork of tan and grey, the sea a sharp line of blue to the north. The radio remained silent. Schroeder's eyes moved constantly, scanning the sky in quadrants, searching for the telltale glint of sunlight on metal. The German pilots preferred to attack from above, using gravity and surprise to compensate for any disadvantage in speed or firepower. But today, the Americans held the altitude. Schroeder saw them first. 4 contacts, low and east, flying in a loose finger 4 formation. Messerschmitt Bf-109s, identifiable by their squared wingtips and the yellow cowling markings of a North African squadron. They were escorting something. Schroeder couldn't see what, but their flight path was predictable, following the coastline at 15,000 feet. He keyed his radio. Contacts, 4 bogies, 3 o'clock low, descending to engage. Moore's acknowledgement was immediate. Schroeder rolled inverted and pulled through into a split SE, diving toward the enemy formation with his airspeed climbing past 400 miles per hour. The P-38's controls stiffened as the speed increased, but the aircraft remained stable, its twin rudders providing authority that single-engine fighters lacked. The Messerschmitts reacted. 2 broke left, climbing to meet the threat. 2 remained with their charges, maintaining escort discipline. Schroeder selected the nearest climber, centered him in his gun sight, and waited for the range to close. At 800 yards, he opened fire. The nose of the P-38 erupted. 4 streams of 50 caliber rounds and 1 cannon shell converged on the target with no dispersion, no need to calculate bullet drop across wing-mounted guns. The German pilot saw the tracers and broke hard right, but the Lightning's concentrated firepower had already found him. Schroeder saw impacts along the fuselage, saw the canopy shatter, saw the Messerschmitt roll inverted and fall away trailing smoke. He did not watch it hit the ground. He was already climbing, his twin engines pulling him back toward altitude, his airspeed still above 350. Moore had engaged the second climber, driving him down and away from the formation. The remaining 2 Messerschmitts turned for home. Schroeder let them go. The mission was not annihilation, it was demonstration. As he turned back toward Algeria, Schroeder felt no elation, no sense of triumph. Only the quiet recognition that the aircraft beneath him had performed exactly as designed, and that the enemy now knew it too. By May 1943, the Luftwaffe had compiled enough reports to recognize the threat. In a windowless room beneath a requisitioned villa outside Tunis, Hauptmann Dieter Horstmann studied reconnaissance photographs and combat loss reports with the methodical precision of an engineer dissecting a failed mechanism. He was not a pilot. He was an analyst, one of a dozen officers tasked with identifying enemy capabilities and recommending countermeasures. The pattern was undeniable. In the 6 weeks since the first encounters with the twin-engine American fighter, German losses had increased by 18% in the North African theater. More troubling than the numbers was the nature of the losses. Experienced pilots, flight leaders, men who had survived Poland, France, and the Eastern Front were being shot down by an aircraft they could neither catch nor escape. Horstmann lit a cigarette and exhaled slowly, watching the smoke curl toward the water-stained ceiling. The reports all described the same characteristics: superior speed above 15,000 feet, concentrated nose armament with devastating accuracy, exceptional climb rate, and, most critically, the ability to disengage at will. The Messerschmitt Bf-109 G6, the Luftwaffe's primary fighter in the theater, could outturn the P-38 in a sustained dogfight, but the American pilots had learned not to dogfight. They exploited their speed, diving from altitude, firing in short bursts and climbing away before German pilots could react. By the time the Messerschmitts maneuvered into position, the Lightnings were already gone. Horstmann drafted his recommendations carefully. First, avoid engagement at high altitude. The P-38's turbochargers gave it a decisive advantage above 20,000 feet. Force the Americans to fight low, where the 109's agility could be employed. Second, attack only when numerical superiority was assured. The Lightning's firepower made one-on-one engagements suicidal. Third, prioritize the destruction of the central nacelle. Pilot interviews indicated that damage to a single engine often allowed the aircraft to continue fighting, but strikes to the cockpit section were invariably fatal. He submitted the report to his commanding officer, who read it without expression and filed it alongside 24 similar analyses. Tactical recommendations were easy to write. Implementation required resources the Luftwaffe no longer possessed. Meanwhile, in Algeria, the American pilots were learning lessons of their own. Lieutenant Schroeder sat in the debriefing room, still wearing his flight suit, still smelling of sweat and engine oil. The mission had gone badly. 2 P-38s lost, 1 pilot recovered, 1 missing. The enemy had ambushed them at low altitude during a strafing run on a German convoy, catching the Lightnings slow and vulnerable. Major White stood at the front of the room, his jaw tight, his eyes hard. The P-38 is not a ground attack aircraft. It was designed as an interceptor and a fighter. When you take it down to the deck, you surrender every advantage it gives you. He let the silence stretch. The pilots stared at their hands, their boots, the scuffed linoleum floor. Speed is life. Altitude is life. You dive, you shoot, you climb. That is the doctrine. The moment you start playing in the weeds with 109s and 190s, you are fighting on their terms, and on their terms they will kill you. Schroeder understood. The P-38 was not invincible. It was a tool, and like any tool, it had to be used correctly. In the hands of a disciplined pilot who understood energy management and situational awareness, it was lethal. In the hands of someone who forgot the basics, it was a coffin with wings. Over the following weeks, the tactics solidified. P-38 squadrons began flying top cover for lower altitude fighters, providing a high-speed reserve that could dive into engagements and disengage before the enemy could respond. They learned to work in pairs, with one aircraft engaging while the other maintained altitude and overwatch. They learned to exploit the Lightning's unique advantage, the ability to fight and flee with equal effectiveness. The Germans adapted as well. Focke-Wulf FBU 190s, faster and more heavily armed than the 109, began appearing in greater numbers. Luftwaffe pilots developed high-speed slashing attacks, diving through American formations and relying on speed rather than maneuverability. Some carried heavier cannon armament, accepting reduced performance in exchange for the ability to destroy a Lightning with a single burst. It became a war of increments. Each side learned, each side bled. And above the Mediterranean, the twin-boomed silhouettes continued their patrols, hunting and being hunted, a symbol of technological superiority tempered by the unforgiving arithmetic of combat. July 10, 1943. Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily, the largest amphibious assault in history, unfolded along the southern coast of the island. Thousands of ships disgorging men and machines onto hostile beaches, while overhead, the air forces of 3 nations collided in a struggle for control of the sky. Lieutenant Schroeder flew his 38th combat mission that morning, leading a 4-ship flight of P-38s tasked with escorting C-47 transports carrying paratroopers toward the drop zones inland. The transport aircraft droned along at 1,500 feet, slow and unarmored, each one carrying 18 men who trusted that the fighters above them would keep the sky clear. Schroeder checked his watch. 0540 hours. The sun was just beginning to break the horizon. painting the underside of scattered clouds in shades of orange and red. His flight flew in a loose combat spread at 8,000 feet, weaving back and forth above the transports, scanning for threats. The radio erupted. "Bandits! Bandits! 12 o'clock high!" Schroeder's eyes snapped upward. 6 contacts, diving from 15,000 feet, silhouettes unmistakable even at distance. Focke-Wulf FDU 190s. The German pilots had learned to time their attacks for the moment when the transports were most vulnerable, betting that the escorts would be forced to choose between protecting their charges and defending themselves. Schroeder did not hesitate. Brake and climb. "Engage on my mark." His wingman, Moore, acknowledged. The 4 P-38s broke formation, each selecting a target, throttles wide open, climbing to meet the attack. Schroeder's airspeed indicator climbed past 300, past 350, the twin engines howling as the turbochargers spooled up. The lead Focke-Wulf fired early, a long burst that missed by 50 yards, tracers arcing harmlessly past Schroeder's canopy. The German pilot had misjudged the closure rate, had assumed the Lightning would try to evade. Instead, Schroeder held his course, closing the distance until the FW-190 filled his gun sight. He pressed the trigger. The nose of the P-38 shuddered as all 5 guns fired simultaneously, the convergence point precisely calibrated to 300 yards. The German aircraft staggered in mid-air, pieces of cowling and wing flashing away in the slipstream. Smoke poured from the engine. The pilot rolled inverted and bailed out, his parachute blossoming white against the dark water below. Schroeder pulled up, clearing his tail, scanning for the next threat. Moore had driven another FW-190 down and away, forcing it into a defensive spiral. The remaining Germans broke off, recognizing that the engagement had turned against them. Below, the transports continued their approach, oblivious to the battle that had just saved their lives. But the morning was not over. By noon, Schroeder's squadron had flown 3 additional sorties, each one a grinding test of endurance and fuel management. The Luftwaffe and Regia Aeronautica had committed everything they had to disrupting the invasion, and the sky above Sicily became a swirling melee of aircraft from a dozen squadrons. During the 4th sortie, Schroeder encountered his most dangerous opponent yet. They met at 22,000 feet, far above the chaos below, in the clean, cold air where the best pilots operated. A single Messerschmitt Bf 109 G6, flown by a man who understood energy tactics and had no intention of fighting the P-38 on its terms. The German pilot did not close for a turning fight. He stayed at distance, slashing in with high-speed passes, firing short bursts, and climbing away before Schroeder could bring his guns to bear. It was a textbook example of boom and zoom tactics, exploiting the one advantage the 109 still held, a slightly faster initial acceleration in the dive. Schroeder tried to reverse the engagement, tried to force the German into a sustained fight, where the Lightning's superior speed and firepower could dominate, but his opponent refused. Each time Schroeder maneuvered into position, the 109 broke away, climbing back to altitude, resetting the engagement. For 10 minutes, they circled each other, neither able to gain a decisive advantage. Schroeder's fuel gauge crept lower. His frustration grew. This was a skilled pilot, someone who had learned the hard lessons of fighting the P-38 and survived. Finally, the German made a mistake. He dove too steeply, trading too much altitude for speed, and Schroeder recognized the opening. He pushed his throttles forward, rolled inverted, and pulled into a diving spiral that intercepted the 109's flight path at a 45-degree angle. The German saw him coming, tried to pull up, but the P-38's speed in the dive was too great, the angle too perfect. Schroeder fired a 2-second burst from 400 yards, leading the target by instinct and training. The rounds struck the 109's wing root. The aircraft shuddered, rolled uncontrollably, and fell away toward the sea. Schroeder did not see a parachute. He turned for home, his hands steady on the controls, his mind already cataloguing the engagement for the next debriefing. He felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only the quiet awareness that he had survived another day, and that the pilot who had fought him with such skill had not. That night, in the tent he shared with 3 other pilots, Schroeder lay on his cot and stared at the canvas ceiling. Somewhere across the Mediterranean, in another tent or barracks or makeshift airfield, German pilots were staring at their own ceilings, thinking their own thoughts, mourning their own dead. The P-38 had given him an advantage, but it had not made him invincible. And every mission was a reminder that the margin between life and death was measured in fractions of seconds and degrees of error. By the autumn of 1943, the P-38 Lightning had become a fixture of Allied air operations in the Mediterranean and European theatres. Production had ramped up, with Lockheed's Burbank facility delivering over 500 aircraft per month. New variants incorporated lessons from combat, upgraded engines, improved cockpit heating, refined control surfaces. But the aircraft's reputation had spread beyond the technical specifications and kill ratios documented in intelligence reports. Among Axis pilots, the Lightning had become a symbol of the shifting balance of power in the air war. Its distinctive silhouette was immediately recognizable, and the sight of twin booms on the horizon was enough to prompt evasive action. In a debriefing room at a Luftwaffe airfield near Rome, Oberleutnant Franz Kohler, now promoted after his survival through the North African campaign, sat with 5 other pilots and listened to a briefing from a visiting tactics instructor. The instructor, a decorated ace from the Eastern Front, spoke bluntly. The P-38 is not invincible. It can be outturned, it can be damaged, but it cannot be fought using the tactics that worked in 1940. If you try to chase it, you will die. If you let it dictate the terms of engagement, you will die. Your only chance is to force it into a situation where its advantages are negated. Kohler listened, his face expressionless. He had survived 4 encounters with Lightnings. Each time, he had come away with the same conclusion. The aircraft demanded a different kind of respect. It was not an opponent to be defeated through bravery or aggression. It was a technological threat that required technological countermeasures, but those countermeasures were slow in coming. The Luftwaffe's focus had shifted to the Eastern Front, where Soviet air power was growing in both quantity and quality. Resources were stretched thin. New aircraft designs were delayed by Allied bombing of production facilities. The men who flew the 109s and 190s were asked to do more with less, to hold the line against an enemy that fielded better equipment in greater numbers. Kohler knew the war was lost. He did not speak of it. None of them did. But the knowledge was there, unspoken, in the way pilots no longer talked about victory, only survival. Across the Mediterranean, Lieutenant Schroeder had been rotated back to the United States for a war bond tour. He spent 6 weeks speaking at airfields and factories, shaking hands with workers and recruits, answering the same questions about the Lightning and the men who flew it. When he returned to Europe in February 1944, the air war had changed again. The P-51 Mustang had begun arriving in numbers, offering range and performance that even the P-38 struggled to match. The strategic bombing campaign over Germany had intensified, and the Lightning's role had shifted from air superiority fighter to long-range escort and reconnaissance platform. Schroeder flew his final combat mission in April 1944, escorting a formation of B-17s deep into France. The mission was uneventful. No enemy fighters appeared. The bombers delivered their payload and turned for home, and Schroeder landed at his airfield in England with nothing to report. He had flown 102 combat sorties in the P-38 Lightning. He had been credited with 9 confirmed kills and 4 probables. He had lost friends, attended memorials, and written letters to families he had never met. The aircraft had done everything it was designed to do. It had given him speed when he needed to escape, altitude when he needed the advantage, firepower when the enemy was in his sights. It had brought him home when others had not returned, but it had not made the war any less brutal, any less arbitrary, any less defined by chance and luck, and the 1,000 tiny decisions that separated the living from the dead. After the war, Schroeder returned to civilian life. He became an engineer, married, raised children, and rarely spoke about his time in the cockpit of a P-38. When asked, he would say only that he had been fortunate, that the aircraft had been good, and that the men he had flown with had deserved better than the war had given them. The P-38 Lightning remained in service until the end of the war, serving in every theatre, from the frozen skies over the Aleutians to the sweltering heat of the South Pacific. It never achieved the fame of the Mustang or the Spitfire, but those who flew it, and those who fought against it, knew its worth. In the years after the war, archival researchers combing through Luftwaffe records would find repeated references to the twin-engine American fighter, tactical assessments, loss reports, pilot interviews. The language was clinical, factual, stripped of emotion. But in the margins of some documents, in the handwritten notes of pilots who had survived encounters with the Lightning, there were other words, phrases that spoke to something beyond tactics and technology: fast, too fast, concentrated fire, no escape. Respect this aircraft. The P-38 Lightning had not won the war alone. No single aircraft could, but it had changed the calculus of air combat in a way that reverberated through every subsequent engagement. It had forced an evolution in tactics, in training, in the very concept of what a fighter aircraft could be. And for the men who flew it, and the men who faced it, it had been a stark reminder that in the unforgiving geometry of aerial combat, technology was only as good as the mind that wielded it. The war ended. The aircraft were retired. The men grew old. But in the silent archives of military history, in the fading pages of combat reports and operational logs, the record remained, a testament to ingenuity under pressure, to adaptation in the face of mortal threat, to the quiet courage of men who climbed into machines of war and did what was asked of them. The P-38 Lightning had met the enemy at altitude, in the cold and hostile air where only the brave and the skillful could survive. And when the enemy realized they could not escape its twin guns, the sky had belonged, for a time, to those who flew it.